Hello, and welcome to another virtual author event at the Poison Pen Bookstore. I'm John Charles. I'm delighted to have with us two extraordinarily talented writers, S.M. Goodwin and Minerva Spencer. Fortunately for us, these two authors come in one person, so we can talk to them at the same time. Before we begin our author chat, I do want to pause for a moment and say, if while listening in, you discover you can't live without a copy of Minerva Spencer's new book or her latest historical mystery as S.M. Goodwin, please feel free to go online to the Poison Pen Bookstore or give us a call, and we would be happy to send a copy or copies out to you in the mail or hold them at the store for you to pick up. And now, without further delay, I would like to welcome S.M. Goodwin and Minerva Spencer.
Good morning, John.
Good morning. We'll stick with Minerva for you since you have so many personalities. That will just
okay
for today, even though you are also visiting us, your alter ego, S.M. Goodwin. The first thing perhaps we could chat a bit about is tell us and those listening in a little bit about yourself before you became a writer. I think it's fair to say you had somewhat of an eclectic career path.
Yes, it took me a while to get to writing. I was a teacher, a lawyer, bartender, dock worker, and then my last actual career, I guess, before writing was a B&B operator. And I did that for 8 long years. So I was ready for a change, and writing seemed like a good fit for my introverted personality.
It's odd because many of those careers are dealing with the public, like bartender and lawyer and for that. So
every time I would do one of those jobs, I would decide to do one of those jobs, somebody in my family would say, "Are you crazy? This is a terrible fit for you." And I would just bowl ahead. And it's true that the bed and breakfast just about drove me over the edge. My husband would probably say it did drive me over the edge. So I got smart after that. It took me 50 years before I figured it out.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about your initial path to publication. Dangerous was your first book, wasn't it, that was published? Yes. So how did you decide, okay, I want to be a writer? What was that process like? Did it involve years and years? Were you published overnight? Talk about that.
I actually got really lucky. I wrote my first book and got introduced to a wonderful agent through a friend at a dinner party. And she said, "Sure, I'll look at it." And she signed me. And I was like, wow, that didn't seem as hard as it should be. She left the profession not long afterward, and I was on my own again. And about a year later, I submitted after my beta readers were nagging me saying, "You really need to just write a query letter," which in my opinion is much harder than writing a book. Kind of distilling, your story into no more than 100 words. So I finally got my act together, did that. And my first batch of query letters yielded me a contract with Kensington, who I've stuck with because I love them.
And for those listening in, that's not the usual path for most authors.
Don't you feel like nowadays, though, that people are, their debuts are just going bonkers and their careers are taking off? I feel like that's become the new normal.
Yeah, it's odd that you say that because, 20 years ago or even further back, you either had to really work at it, and it could involve years of submitting work before you finally got accepted, or there were the rare exceptions. Like I remember Kathleen Woodowitz her manuscript was like snatched up overnight by some famous editor who published her, but there really wasn't that many of those breakthrough authors. But now I think, and this is just me guessing, publishers are so hungry to find that breakout initial debut author that they're just latching on to things, hoping that one of them is going to be the next Da Vinci Code or Con Girl or whatever.
Right. It seems like everything I read about has gone to auction. Nobody sells through the long slogging hard route, but that's probably just a skewed perception because you see all the success stories and don't see the thousands of others. So
no, I think you're right, but I think there's a downside to authors too, because if you don't make it big, and by big, like hit the New York Times bestseller list with your first book, you can be dropped, and it's hard to get back.
I get the feeling that a lot of publishing houses aren't willing to grow an author like they used to do. That's what people who've been in the business have told me. You have kind of one shot now. Good luck with it.
Well, fortunately, Kensington seems to be rather happy with you because you've gone on to something of a career with them. And then you branched out and you decided you wanted to write historical mysteries as S.M. Goodwin. What
Yes.
prompted that?
The way I usually come up with a story is just it occurs to me in the course of the day, and I sit down and write a little bit of it. And that's what happened with the first Leitner and Law book. I just really saw those characters and immediately wrote 75 pages and sent it to my agent and said, hey, what do you think about this? And she's very open to anything that I want to submit. She's pretty willing to do it. So she loved it. And a year later, there it was in print. So we're on to book 2 now, and hopefully book 3 sometime soon.
Now, the first book was Absence of Mercy in your historical series, mystery series.
Yes.
And the new one is Crooked in His Ways.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit, give us an introduction to the characters and then tell us about the new book as much as you can without spoiling it.
Okay. I didn't realize until you read the first book. So, and I remember your response was, yes, I like it. It's not exactly my usual fare. And I think what happened was with that first book, I really left the reader hanging at the end of the book. I was pretty cruel in terms of what I did with the main character, one of the main characters. And one of my beta readers, George, who is kind of my Yoda, he really was unhappy with the way I left the hero at the end of that first book. And so he was a lot happier with book 2, where I'm far less cruel to my characters. I do put them through the ringer, but it ends on an up note, I think. And it's really interesting having 2 protagonists, because especially over the course of more than, I'm used to writing romances where it's one and done for some characters. And this is, hey, I want to develop these characters in a gradual way so I don't kind of, spill the beans in book 2 and have nothing else to write about. So that's been a real challenge. In the second book, I think I'm a little bit more balanced, exploring the second character, Hieronymus Law, who was kind of cast in the shade by Jasper in the first book, I think. But
so you have these 2 characters. One is a British aristocrat, Jasper Law. The other is an American police detective who's disgraced, professionally disgraced, Hieronymus. Did I get that mixed up? Jasper.
No, Hieronymus Law and Jasper Leitner.
There you go. So you've got kind of this whole opposites attract thing. And I think you could pretty much say, when it comes to your philosophy of detective fiction, 2 is better than 1. So can you kind of elaborate as to why you want a duo and why opposites attract make for better crime fiction?
I think it probably came out of the romance writing, where that trope of opposites attract is always a lot of fun. Yeah. I think it leads to the best dialogue, as the characters have to, there's a lot of give and take in that kind of dynamic. So, and then also, I guess the more I think about it now, I didn't think about it then, I just wrote it. But now I think would be very difficult to get a lot of the background details out in an elegant way if you just have one character, because they're probably going to be doing there'll be an inner monologue, which I think it's okay, but I mean, it can get tiresome. So I like having somebody who pulls that out of their opposite over time. And, they're discovering them along with the reader, and actually me, because that's how I write. I ask the question and the character tells me the answer. So
now, in the book, there's this certain character who's kind of blackmailing a lot of people, and comes to a bad end in a rather colorful way. Was this inspired by a real historical event, or how much history do you put in your mystery?
Yeah, it's funny that you asked, because it did come from a real story about the brother of Samuel Colt, who invented the Colt pistol. And his brother was definitely, he was not holding up his end of the family. He was kind of definitely getting into trouble left, right, and center. And he wound up in jail. And the story is so garbled. I mean, it was just this bizarre tale of how he basically, he was accused of cutting up some guy, putting him in a crate of salt and shipping him somewhere. I don't remember where. And it was just a deal gone bad. You know, he was kind of a low-level criminal dealing with other low-level criminals, and and somebody ended up dead. So it's partly that, and it's also partly a story about a dentist who got murdered by a woman in at the same time. So I conflated these two really sensational stories and came up with something completely different. I think I like the blackmail trope, you know. I didn't realize that until a reviewer said, you really enjoy writing, having characters get blackmailed. It's like, well, yeah, because it really makes people do things that they otherwise wouldn't do, you know. I mean, I think about what would make me act against my character, only fear of something worse. So, and that's what the people in this book are. They're, for the most part, well, some of them are other criminals, but most of them are just good people who get caught by somebody who's definitely willing to exploit them.
Now, the series is set before the Civil War in the US. And somewhere I read that you had said that you like, as a writer, writing about the period before a war or after a war, but not the war itself. Why?
That's from back when I used to teach history. I found that it's really easy when you're studying a war to get either sucked into the politics or the battles themselves, and just for things to become this litany of, and then they fought here, and then they fought there. And I find that before a war, that's really going to give you the reasons for what's about to happen. And I think that's the fascinating part, is like when there's a breakdown in the system, and after that, you know, well, the chaos of war is not particularly interesting to me. And then afterward, particularly in the United States with Reconstruction, you look at it and it was just such a catastrophic failure. But you could see when you read about it, that they're just the complete and utter exhaustion of the populace from, you know, 5 years of fighting. So I do understand why they kind of dropped the ball. However, it's a major disappointment in American history, that's for sure, which we're still living with. So, but anyway, this period in New York, I think, is interesting because in microcosm, you're experiencing what the rest of the country is experiencing, which is a slow disintegration.
What I love about reading historical fiction or historical mysteries or historical whatever is learning these fascinating little tidbits of history that you never knew before. And your mysteries and your historical romances are just filled with them. But in your latest book, there's a couple things that just were so intriguing. At one point, I think it was during the 4th of July celebrations, one of your characters was trying to get a telegram out, and the telegraph lines were down. And then there's this group of people like, well, hire our carrier pigeons. I mean, how do you find these little fascinating details and slip them into this? And did they really use carrier pigeons back then?
They did. And that was where I kind of discovered that, is because there was a lot of competition for these companies that were putting up the telegraph lines were obviously very competitive. So there was a lot of what is that, espionage, corporate espionage going on. And I'm trying to remember the guy's name. It was one of the big news, Reuters.
Oh.
Reuters. That's actually named after a guy. And this has been 2 years since I've researched this. But from what I remember, he had a system going which incorporated carrier pigeons as part of the, you know, they're partly by stage, we would take mail, partly by ship, and then also carrier pigeons. So he managed to like span great distances with his combination. And obviously Reuters was successful enough to endure. They're still around, right?
They're still a press, wire press, whatever.
Yeah, it's UP that's gone, right? AP's here and Reuters here.
Yeah.
So, and those Associated Press, that's also the early days of that. So there was a lot of information about, you know, how do you get information from point A to point B? And as soon as people are making money, then they're not interested in cooperating with each other. Great stories there.
And Jasper, you kind of also ground him in history too, because before, to set up the whole series, he was British, and he comes to New York to kind of train their police department in the new technology or the new techniques of the day, which are based on the French. Then is it Vidocq?
Yeah, Vidocq.
So
Eugene Vidocq, who is considered by some, you know, the founder of modern criminal science. Although this is way early. You know, it's so funny because people say, well, why wouldn't they just use fingerprints or blood type? It's like, hey, they didn't know there were different blood types, you know, and fingerprints, I think that's not until the turn of the century, close to 1890s maybe. So yeah, this is definitely a lot of intuitive, you know, putting together. It's the science of thought, I guess, not so much technology, but enlightened thinking.
And then another one of the sources I guess you used for this book was city directories. Can you talk a little bit? Now, we'll pause for a moment while anyone under the age of 50 Googles city directory to see what they are, but perhaps you can also tell us what they were and why you found them so valuable.
They were essentially the phone books of the 19th century, so clearly before there were any phones. And every year, starting in, I think, the 1780s, the first company that did it would go around door to door and take information from every household, who lived there, what their jobs were, their marital status, and then they'd publish that. So they did it every year in New York, which was a city of I don't know how many million by the time 1857 comes around, but a lot of people. And and the person who edited and put it together has his own tone and own voice. He'd write these little forwards, and he'd be sniping at the people who would refuse to give him the information. He's like, we know why you really don't want to tell us. So then he'd give the address with no information. And I can imagine that was probably something that young men got liquored up and did, is visit houses of people who refused to give information. But so those were an enormous source of information, especially when it came to jobs and careers, because they're all these things that we don't have anymore. I mean, the number of cigar makers alone was stunning. Each page would have like 50 cigar makers. So it was a real cottage industry back then. I don't think cigar making is real big now. Maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah. Okay, let's switch gears a little bit and let's talk about your Minerva Spencer new book, which is Infamous, and it comes out next week. Tell us a little bit about this book and about the Minerva Spencer side of your writing career.
Actually, this book, it features this twin sons who were in the book Barbarous. Now, Barbarous, which was my second book, was actually the book that I wrote first. So, and my editor just loved Dangerous and said, no, I think this introduces the whole concept much better. Let's switch these around. But I think somewhere inside my head, I must have thought, oh, a good way to end this was the way I began it, which is this children of the first story. So that's what this second series, The Rebels of the Ton, is dealing with, is the offspring of the first generation, the Outcasts book. So, and this was my very first time writing a book with two heroes and two heroines. And that was an interesting, I had to be a bit more organized than usual. I realized, gee, I've written almost the whole book with one chapter from one perspective. So then I had to go back and rip and tear and write in a bunch of new stuff. But I'm pretty satisfied with the results. I think it was balanced enough.
Well, as a writer, and this may be just my perception of you, but you tend to like to push against conventional genre, the conventions of the genre. I mean, especially as a romance writer and even as a historical mystery writer. In this particular book, Infamous, you take something that a lot of romance readers would not normally expect in a book. You take a heroine who is not likable. In fact, she could be considered, Celia, the Regency equivalent of a mean girl when the book starts out. And usually it's like, oh, the reader has to identify with the heroine. She has to be nice and likable and, you know, plucky and all these other things that you want to project yourself into. But here's this, well, let's just kind of basically call her a bitch to begin the book out. But you give her some rationale. The reader understands why she's doing it, but still she's destroying people socially. Tell us a little bit about her.
Well, you know, it's funny because there's this big trend in historical fiction to write about, you know, feminist romance. And I think that's a real challenge because I don't want to destroy what's fun about historical romance, which is that there was an imbalance of power between the sexes. So I think that's critical to historical romance. However, that doesn't mean that women couldn't be strong within that kind of the confines of society. And you know, from reading thousands and thousands of historical romances, that the rakish jerk is a much beloved character who time and time again, manages to skate through with the reader loving him. And I thought, well, if we're trying to be really, balanced toward the sexes, why don't I have a woman who just is, self-centered and going to get what she wants at all costs? So it never occurred to me that there's a different kind of reader expectation for heroines. And I think that that's true, although I've been pleasantly surprised that a lot of readers are willing to kind of hang in there with Celia and see why is she that way. And she's, also remember she's 17, which if any of us weren't jerks at 17, I salute them. But so yeah, I think it was time to have, somebody who seemed irredeemable. And in fact, when I had a conversation with you after I'd written this, you mentioned one of Susan Elizabeth Phillips' books, which I went and read. I can never remember the name of the book, but it's
Sweet.
Okay, Ain't She Sweet? Yeah, boy, that heroine was bad.
Oh yeah.
I thought there's no way she's going to be able to, kind of redeem her, and yet by the end, I think that's probably my favorite book of hers. So it can be done.
Well, I think you actually did it, because the heroine Celia, one of them, is brought low, and she pretty much is clinging by her fingertips to the last rung of respectability in society, being a lady's companion. And you actually, to your credit as a writer, the reader watches her kind of evolve emotionally, mature, realize that she's made mistakes, and try to atone for them. And that really makes for a more fully rounded character, a more relatable, real person.
Yeah, and that was a real struggle for me, because at first I thought, gosh, I should make her grovel a lot, right? Because that's usually my approach with male characters when they've done wrong, and I have a grovel festival for several chapters. But I only had a short period of time for these characters to interact, 8 days or something over Christmas. And so I wanted to show her progression in a more mature way, like kind of, hey, she deeply regrets what she's done, not only because it brought her low, but because of, what it did to other people's lives. But all she can do now is be a better person, So I think that's how you have to respond when you've done something wrong. But yeah, I liked her. I wound up liking her a lot.
Yeah, she was a great character, and you give her kind of her almost perfect equal in the hero, and now his name is escaping my memory right now.
Oh, Richard.
Richard, yeah. And he turns out really, he's it's like going to your high school reunion 10 years later. He's the dork that nobody wanted to associate with, and now he's the wealthy tech genius, the Regency equivalent of that, who's got all the money and fame, and he's a scientist. And even though that seems, some people might say, really, is that historically accurate? But in the 19th century, there was like this whole explosion of interest in the science, and you have these English men and some English women traversing the globe and looking at bugs and jewels and rocks and minerals. Can you kind of talk about how you pulled from history to create Richard?
Yes, and in fact, I like to hide little Easter eggs in my books, and I don't think most people don't ever find them. I like to hide quotes from, I can't tell you how many Dashiell Hammett quotes I have hidden within my 2 mysteries. They're in there, they're tucked away. You just have to find them. In this one, I have an address that he lives at, and it's actually Charles Darwin's address. So who was just going to the same school as Richard, right around the same time as that character. So he would just be starting, be a bit younger. And in fact, I mentioned in there that his university advisor, for lack of a better phrase, wants to introduce him to this young man named Darwin.
That's right. I remember that from the book. That was, yeah.
So yeah, it's an interesting period of history, because it's still very, again, like, it's still very pre-science in a lot of ways. And this is a gentleman's pursuit, the naturalist, right? There's just, I guess it's being made into a science, right, during this period of time. So, but that was fun, and I got to really explore a lot of insects, which
oh my God, ew.
I just love bugs. I think in my next life I'm going to be an entomologist. So Richard was a very easy character to write.
You did kind of let him show readers the beauty in beetles that I didn't think was possible, but to each his own.
Mhm.
This was this also your first holiday romance?
Yes, yes, it was. And I had to rely heavily on a friend of mine who's also a writer, Vanessa Kelly. I wound up sending her a frantic email at some point. I'm like, oh, I'm supposed to be this Christmas party, and and all I'm having are romantic shenanigans. I need holiday shenanigans. So she like calmed me down and walked me through it. And basically, I was really happy with how that turned out. I thought, well, just think about what I'd like to do if I was at a house party, you know. And I love the things from youth that were like, get together in a group and go on a scavenger hunt, that type of thing. So it turned out to be easier than I thought once I had the voice of reason in the form of Vanessa calming me down. But it was fun.
Now you've written both a series, historical mystery series. You've written the romance equivalent of series in your Rebels of the Time. Is it an Outcast of the Time?
The Rebels.
Rebels. Yeah, though romance series is not quite the same thing. As an author, when you were writing these books, did you know, like for your historical mystery series, this is how I want it to develop? I'm going to know these things. For the historical romance series, did you kind of plan? In other words, did you kind of plan things out, or did it organically just happen as a writer when it comes to series?
Unfortunately, every single time that I've written a book, it's just happened. I never think about what's next. And with this recent book that I'm working on right now, I think I may have complained or whined to you at some point that I'm having a difficult time with this book, which I just finished a few days ago, 4 days ago. But I actually wrote a long, you couldn't call it an outline so much as a synopsis. And I sent it to my editor and I said, hey, here's the crazy idea I have for this book. Am I way out there? And I've never done that before with anything. I've never gone from like beginning, middle, and end and then showed it to somebody. And she was awesome. You know Alicia. Yeah. And so her response was, I love it. So like, great, now I'm doomed to do this really complicated story. So this is very much my first espionage story, although it's not, it's taking place during the 100-day campaign when Napoleon leaves Elba. So, is it really espionage at that point? It's kind of a military free-for-all, but that's a very exciting time in history, I think, to me. I try to imagine how they could possibly have let him get off that island. And when I'm writing it, it's set in France. I'm expressing the wonder of people going, he's back again. And, some people obviously are going to be thrilled, right?
Yeah.
And many hundreds of thousands were, apparently.
I would say we could almost make some comparisons to modern political times, but we won't.
I wasn't going to go there, but that's what I wrote to Alicia. I said, strangely enough, this ties into, this whole, the Bonaparte dynasty, which there's still a Bonaparte. I think his name is Nicholas. He just got married a couple of years ago, and I was looking up to see what had happened with the family line, and boy, is he good looking. As a complete aside there, but there still are descendants of Napoleon running around.
Now you are what is known in the industry as a hybrid author. You've worked with traditional publishers, you've published on your own. For those that are tuning in that might not have any knowledge or experience or know what this is, can you kind of talk a little bit about what hybrid publishing is and why as an author you kind of gravitated towards it?
Being hybrid just means you do self-publishing in addition to traditional publishing. And it was, honestly, I thought I'd never want to do self-publishing because there's so many, it's a lot of marketing, first of all. And then you have to be the one getting an editor and a proofreader and a formatter. So I thought, I just don't want to mess with that. But my output definitely has exceeded my sales to traditional publishers. So here I am stuck with this pile of books that I really like. So I decided, well, I'll give it a whack. And it turns out that I actually really like it. Even though Kensington has never said, hey, we want you to write this or to do this, I always feel a certain pressure to to keep marketability in my thoughts while writing it. Like, oh, I really want this to please people and be really successful. In spite of my, as you mentioned earlier, my
pushing
like
against the boundaries. You push, but you don't push through, I guess, is when it comes to your traditional publishers.
I do. Yeah. I mess with the reader's head, but not a whole lot. In my self-publishing, boy, I can just do whatever I want. And that's funny because some of my self-published books have become very popular. And I think that maybe there's more room for that in the genre than I suspected. You know, I thought, oh, people want, you know, a comforting, predictable experience when they read a book. And actually, there are some people who like to skate along the edge and have their boundaries pushed. So that's been a lot of fun. And it's allowed me to publish a lot of things that I think there's just not a market for in traditional publishing either.
I think you're right, because traditional publishers have to think big. And if you're not going to sell like 10,000 or whatever the number copies is, your idea isn't going to work with them. But that idea might work with 2,000 readers or whatever the number is.
I also think that they have been hidebound forever and recently have had their comeuppance, because when I saw you a couple months ago, I mentioned reading a alien romance where the aliens are blue and 7 feet tall and have horns, and you gave me a look. Anyway, I just read that this woman who is self-published and has sold an amazing number of ebooks has made a deal with Berkeley, and they will be distributing her books to, you know, all the major retailers. So here's somebody that I'm sure people at Berkeley thought, no way would this ever sell. And then, so they've completely misread the market, because I mean, pretty much everybody I know has read some of these women's books.
Yeah.
They're just crazy. They're just like wildfire. So
it was like that. There was one point in time when they were like dinosaur romances or something like that.
Oh, I haven't heard of that.
I think that was like 6 years ago or something. Yes, it was interspecies romance.
Oh, yeah. Well, there's a lot of that. I still haven't gotten into like shifters, people shifting into other creatures, but I'm sure that eventually I'll get there. But anyway, I just think that you're seeing more and more often a lot of self-publishers who are getting deals with the big publishers, you know, and they've kind of like built a huge readership already. So it's kind of like, well, that's where's the bad side for that for somebody like Berkeley? So
this last couple years has been difficult for a lot of authors because you're kind of stuck at home. And I know that you briefly this summer, when it seemed like things were coming to a better end, you kind of went on the road to do a book tour.
Yes.
And that was with the Costco's and was that not?
Yes, Costco's, and then I also hit a lot of Barnes and Noble and a Poison Pen.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wound up doing like, I think 52 stores. So, and just signing the stock in most of them, since people still weren't doing events. But yeah, that was kind of a weird, surreal. Word surreal is overused, but I think it fits in this, because here I went from not going anywhere. I mean, really not going anywhere. My husband does all the shopping. I hadn't left the house, and then like bang, we're on the road for 3 weeks. And honestly, if he hadn't nagged me, I would have gone to one bookstore and then hidden in the car for the rest of the time. So he would just take me from store to store and like shove me out of the car. And we did that every day for 3 weeks. So it was baptism by fire in terms of getting out into the world. And yeah, I think it's a good thing that I did it then, because it seems less wise to do it now.
Is your publisher kind of continuing to, we're not going to do much in the way of real events for the time being?
Yes, I think I shocked them. I think they were like, you're really going to do this? And so put their feet to the fire in terms of getting in touch with some of the distributors and making sure that people knew I was coming. But yeah, even now, I don't think anybody's, I don't know, are you guys doing in-person events at Poison Pen?
We've flirted with one or two this summer, depending on the author. So I think they're kind of testing the waters, but it's difficult because you just don't know. Things are so unsettled still, despite vaccines everything else, and yet people are going to concerts and Broadway's opening up and all this other stuff. So
Yeah,
hopefully we can
it
have
seems like the book industry has been more conservative because I know that some big conferences have also changed their mind and gone back to, they were going to do it in person. Now they're going to have an online conference. So, yeah, I don't know. We were going to come back to Phoenix, not caring about the state of the world. But then we got 2 new puppies and we realized now we're not going anywhere for at least 6 months. So, or we'll come back to a chewed up house.
Now you have a rather large menagerie to begin with, don't you?
My menagerie has just really shrunk in the last couple of years as everyone's gotten older, and we just started to take in new animals again. And so we buy guard dogs from poultry farmers where they've been raised kind of, growing up among the birds. And we usually get 2 at a time so they can work together. And our last old dog just died a few months ago. So that's why we thought, gosh, really ready to get 2 more. And we did. And they're definitely cute, but it's when you're training dogs to protect the flock, you got to make sure that they don't eat the flock.
Yeah.
And they were only 6 weeks when we got them, so they were babies.
And you kind of become the, I guess, rest home for displaced chickens and wildfowl and things like that.
Yes, yeah, we do. We take in. I just take in older birds or birds people don't want. So, I'm a vegan, so the eggs are not really an issue anyhow. Usually we wind up with all these eggs, like having to give them away. So it's just fun for me to have. Chickens are my choice of pet. And my husband loves dogs, so it works out well.
There you go. Let's take another turn. And what has been on your summer reading list this year as a reader, other than books with 7-foot-tall blue aliens? What you like to share with other readers?
Well, I've been reading. I usually read 2 or 3 books at one time when I have the luxury of reading. And I like Joe Abercrombie, and he's a fantasy writer. And he's just come out with his 3rd book in a series that's set in the what's it called? 7 Kingdoms or something like that. Anyway, I've been waiting until all 3 books were out before I binge read on that, and it's definitely worth waiting for. And then also, as soon as I finished my draft of this book, The Boxing Baroness, I decided I could indulge in some historical romance, and I read a couple of books by Anna Bradley.
Yeah.
She's got I do remember the title of this series because it's very catchy, The Swooning Virgins Society. So I caught up on that, and then also caught up on Shayna Galen's Survivors Club, which is a long-running series that I really enjoy. So I don't usually get to read a lot of historical romance since I don't read it while I'm writing. I don't like to get that idea bleed, but right now I'm not going to crank up again for another week, so I'll be reading a lot.
And do you read both digitally and print, or? Yes,
I probably actually I thought the day would never come when I'd read mostly in ebooks, but there aren't really many fiction bookstores near us for many miles. So if I want books, I either have to sit and wait for them to come in the mail, or I can go through the library. They have that overdrive system.
Yes.
That's become really convenient. So especially if you read as fast as I do, I couldn't afford to buy all the books.
I mean, you're a fast reader and a fast writer. I'm just amazed at how quickly
I'm a consumer. Perfect American consumer.
Now, before we run out of time, you don't have to answer this question, but can you tell us what's next for you as a writer? If you don't want to say anything, that's fine. But
what's next? Do you mean in terms of branching off into other directions, or
what, as a reader, what can we expect next from you?
That would be the book 1 in the Wild Late Women of Whitechapel, which is The Boxing Baroness, and that's coming out I think next August. Okay. And these are about 3 women who are working a circus. And one of them obviously is a boxer. One is a markswoman and
Which there
one
were
is
actually women in Regency times that did that. That's not
there were
yeah.
a lot. Yeah. It was well, with the kind of propensity of Regency men for liking to watch things fight, roosters, rats,
yeah.
bears, whatever. Yeah. Have you ever read about rat pits? That came up for the first time.
No.
Yeah, they'd like throw a schnauzer into a pit full of
Oh,
rats.
no, stop there.
So anyway, that's the series that's coming up starting next year.
And is there the potential for more historical mysteries or adventure?
I've got a concept for another series, but it's early days yet. But I'm always working on other stuff just because if something comes to mind, I like to get a couple of chapters written in case I do have an opportunity to pursue it. But
And you also have books that you are publishing yourself too that are coming out.
yes, I've done a crazy schedule. I think this year I've published 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 books.
Good.
So I know. And I was just sitting down to plan out next year, and my husband's like, if you schedule 8 books again, I'll kill you. Because it's pretty much insanity around here as I'm lurching from book to book, trying to get them ready to go, especially the self-published ones, but you don't really have any help. So
well, I can't believe how quickly our time has flown by. Before we end, I do want to again let listeners tuning in know about your new book, Infamous, as Minerva Spencer, comes out next week, Historical Regency, and your historical mystery as S.M. Goodwin is Crooked in His Ways.
yes.
And that is currently out. We also have the first in the series, Absence of Mercy, all available from the Poison Pen. We would love to have you order them from us. We're so grateful for Minerva and SM for sharing her time with us today.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for tuning in, those listening into another virtual event at the Poison Pen.
Hello. We hope you're enjoying our programs and podcasts with authors. We'd like to expand them, and your help would be appreciated. Please make a donation at poisonedpenfoundation.org. 100% of the proceeds will go to help connect authors with readers in this difficult time. Thank you.